A new era of Jets football begins this Sunday against the Cleveland Browns, and this game could come down to which team has the better player named Garrett. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, November 7th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangandGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's show, we are previewing Week 10 action. The Cleveland Browns are coming to MetLife Stadium on Sunday to take on the New York Jets. Kickoff time scheduled for 1 p.m. Eastern. If you're watching it on TV, the game will be televised on CBS. We're going to talk about how this could be a really wild game between two teams that are pretty low in the standings. We'll talk about how this could be a Garrett versus Garrett matchup. No, Garrett Wilson and Myles Garrett don't line up directly against each other, but the player who has the bigger impact could determine which team wins. But we're going to begin by talking about what this game means, because this is a very significant game for the New York Jets. Maybe not in the standings. Yeah, we know the Jets at 1-7 are not going to make a playoff run this year. We're going to head to 15 straight years with no playoffs. This is going to be a 10th straight season with a losing record. There's not going to, I know in theory the Jets could run off 9 more wins and get to 10-7. It's not going to happen. And we know it's not going to happen. We know it wasn't realistic anyway. This week showed a big change in direction for the New York Jets franchise. And by now, I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you know what happened this week. The Jets traded star corner Sauce Gardner to the Indianapolis Colts for 2 first-round picks. They traded star defensive tackle Quinnen Williams to the Dallas Cowboys for a first-round pick and a second-round pick. This is a Jets team that was already focused on the future. Heading into the season, we knew that it was likely to be a difficult year. There was a pathway for this team to, surprise people. In fact, there were, a few plays here or there. Jets would be around 500 right now, but it wouldn't be a good football team. It would not be a team with a good foundation. And I think that the trades that were made this week were an acknowledgement that this is a Jets team that is still a very long way away. A Jets team that really needs to focus on the future. So 2 star players who are in their prime are no longer on this team. And the Jets now have 4 additional premium draft picks. I think that these moves change the meaning of the final 9 weeks of the season for the New York Jets. Because through the offseason, through training camp, through the exhibition season, and even early in the regular season, I've said something consistently. And that's that I wanted to see the Jets be better the second half of the season than they were in the first half. Because so much about success or failure in 2025 for this team, with so many young players on the roster, with so many young players seeing significant playing time, is about making progress. You want to see an upward trajectory through the season when you've got young players. And this is a Jets team that even before the trades had young players all over the field. Jets are going to get even younger now. You're going to see Azareye'h Thomas become a full-time starter. He's going to get game reps over the final nine weeks of the season. The Jets had big expectations for him when they drafted him this spring in the 3rd round out of Florida State. I think that you'll probably see an increased snap total for Juwan Briggs. And also, the Jets have added a couple wide receivers over the last couple weeks in some of these trades. And I think that their throw-ins, I don't think the Jets made the deal for Michael Carter II to get John Mechie in here. I think it was a salary dump, and Mechie was just kind of sitting on the Eagles bench. So the Jets said, hey, why don't you throw him in? We think he's got a little upside. I don't think Adonai Mitchell was a driving force behind the Sauce Gardner trade. It was all about the 2 first-round picks. Adonai Mitchell was kind of like the secondary part of the deal. But he's a guy who Colts are a team with a lot of depth at wide receiver. Was a guy with a good draft pedigree, a guy who I'm presuming Aaron Glenn and Darren Mucci scouted before the NFL draft. Adonai Mitchell hasn't been in the league that long, so it was a recent scouting project for Aaron Glenn and Darren Mucci. I'm sure they said, you know what, hey, Colts, if you want Sauce Gardner, why don't you send us this receiver who you're not really playing all that much? So you're going to see more opportunities at the wide receiver position. And, I don't know that the wide receiver position is necessarily better for the Jets than it was 2 weeks ago. But there's a difference at wide receiver in that there are actually players with plausible upside here. Look, I don't know that I'd bet on Adonai Mitchell or John Mechie performing at a high level. I don't know that I'd bet on either of those guys becoming a long-term contributor for the Jets. But now they're going to have an opportunity. And now, like, it's a little bit different when you're playing these guys opposed to playing Josh Reynolds or Alan Lazard or Tyler Johnson. There's a pathway for guys to show improvement. Really, prior to these two trades, the only wide receiver the Jets had who had any upside was Arian Smith, who wasn't showing a lot of upside and has a pretty limited skill set, if we're being honest. Adonai Mitchell is a guy who conceivably could become a starting receiver in this league. Will he? It's going to be a long road, and it's not something I would bet on. But with all these young players, I think expectations have to change. And with Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams gone, I think expectations have to change. The Jets just gave up 38 points 2 weeks ago without Sauce Gardner, with Quinnen Williams in the lineup. Now, it was against the Bengals team that has phenomenal talent at the wide receiver position and a quarterback in Joe Flacco who knows what he's doing in the pocket. But I don't think the expectations now for the second half of the season are what they were before these two trades. Because for me, like, the biggest point of progress was I wanted to see the team improve. Well, the biggest way you show improvement is by winning games. I think sometimes we separate the idea that the team shows improvement. We act like the team showing improvement and the results on the field are separate, when in reality, when the team shows improvement, you're more likely to win games, and you'll probably win more games. The individual players on the Jets team now, these young guys, and this is just going to be a team that's loaded with young players. These players individually can show improvement now, but when you take Sauce Gardner and you take Quinnen Williams off the team, it's you're not going to win a lot of games. This is a defense that was really struggling to begin with, even with their two best players having pretty good seasons. So I think everything's changed. And if you are a believer in tanking, well, this will be a delight for you, because the Jets are probably not going to win many games the rest of the way. Now, the positive, if you're not a tanker, is this is a very winnable game, even with Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams no longer on the team. The Browns are not exactly a great football team. Browns are a pretty bad football team in their own right. But the hope now is that you see some of these young players start to blossom. This is a Jets team. We've talked about at any given week through the first 8 games of the season, you probably had between 9 and 11 players seeing an appreciable share of the snaps. And by a young player, I mean either a first or a second year player. That number is going to go up now. That number was really high to begin with. It's going to go even higher. And, look, that's a good approach. It's better to be, if you're going to be bad, it's better to load the field with young players, certainly compared with what the Jets were doing last year when they had a pretty old team. And they were, through the end of the season, one of the things that I think was so difficult about watching the team was it was loaded with old players who you knew were not coming back next year. So you couldn't even get excited about watching guys develop. This year's different. This year you have a chance to watch guys hopefully develop. And it's all over the place. You can talk about the draft picks, whether it's Mason Taylor, Malachi Moore. You can talk about some of the guys the Jets have acquired in trades now: John Mechie, Adonai Mitchell, Jarvis Brownlee Jr., Jawan Briggs. There are opportunities all over the field for the Jets players to show that they belong in this league. And not everybody the Jets are putting on the field is going to end up being a long-term piece here. And that's just the way it is. When you have this sort of youth movement, when you go into this sort of deep rebuild, part of it's you're throwing guys on the field you're not expecting to develop, but sometimes they surprise you. For years, I've heard this from Jets fans that, if we're going to stink, at least put young guys on the field and get them reps and see if we can maybe find some guys who surprise us. That's what the Jets are doing right now. And it's going to make the last 9 games of the season interesting. It also changes the expectations of those last 9 games quite a bit. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, there's one player on offense who we know is not a developmental player. That's Garrett Wilson. He's coming back into the lineup this week. He just confirmed it yesterday. On the other side of the ball for the Cleveland Browns, Myles Garrett's not a player Garrett Wilson's going to be facing directly, but the player who's allowed to make the bigger impact on this game could determine who wins. We'll talk about that more as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Mint Mobile. If you're still overpaying for wireless, it's time to say yes to saying no. At Mint Mobile, their favorite word is no. No contracts, no monthly bills, no overages, no hidden fees, no BS. You can say yes to making the switch and getting premium wireless for just $15 a month. Mint makes it simple. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can even bring your own phone and keep your same number and contacts. You're getting the same quality service you had before, but for a fraction of the price. And the setup is super easy. You keep your number and then you're running in minutes. Ready to say yes to saying no? Make the switch at mintmobile.com/LockedOnNFL. That's mintmobile.com/LockedOnNFL. Upfront payment of $45 required, equivalent to $15 a month. Limited time new customer offer for first 3 months only. Speeds may slow above 35 gigabytes on the unlimited plan. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by Gametime. The NFL season is here, and honestly, there's nothing better than being at MetLife Stadium surrounded by fans cheering on the Jets. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle. Between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout, it's frustrating. And that's why I use Gametime, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Gametime is fast, easy, and backed by the Gametime guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. I'm a Gametime customer. I've used it on a number of occasions, as I've mentioned on the show. I used it to go see the Jets play the Broncos in London a few weeks back. I've used it to go see shows on Broadway. I've used it to go to the U.S. Open for tennis. I've used it to go to a college football game a few years back. It's super easy to use. And again, I like that you see the price before you buy. No hidden fees at checkout. You know exactly what you're paying. Download the Gametime app today, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, one word with no space for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. The Jets host the Cleveland Browns this Sunday at MetLife Stadium. Kickoff time scheduled for 1 p.m. Eastern. On today's show, we are previewing this game. Jets get some good news. Garrett Wilson, the team's star receiver, says that he is ready to go after the bye week. He's missed the last couple of games with an injury that he suffered in the Jets' loss in London. But Garrett Wilson will return. Now, the Jets scored 39 points the last time they were on the field without Garrett Wilson. I think anybody who knows the first thing about football knows that that is not a signal that the Jets are better off without Garrett Wilson. It's a signal that random things happen in the NFL. And Garrett Wilson's really the only proven quality receiver the Jets have on their roster at the moment. Now, as we talked about a little bit earlier, the Jets have made a couple trades over the last couple of weeks. They've gotten in some young guys with potential upside as throw-ins in deals. The Michael Carter II trade brought John Mechie. The Sauce Gardner trade brings Adonai Mitchell to New York. But I don't know how much these guys are going to play this week. I wouldn't be surprised to see them get into the rotation going forward, particularly Mitchell, who's just been in New York for a couple of days. But Garrett Wilson is the go-to guy on this offense. I think something's very telling is that the New York Jets started the week with 3 genuine stars, and 2 of them were traded, Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams. They both play on the defensive side of the ball. Garrett Wilson's an offensive guy, and there were reports that teams inquired about Garrett Wilson because, if you're seeing the Jets trade away all their star players for draft picks, why would you not check in to see whether Garrett Wilson's available? And the reports indicate that the Jets said Garrett Wilson was not available in a trade, that the Jets were not willing to move on from Garrett Wilson. And I think that clearly tells you something about the Jets' plan right now, is that the Jets are, in many ways tearing it down. They're thinking long-term. They want to build a new team, but they view Garrett Wilson as a centerpiece of this new rebuild. And the reason for that is that they're probably drafting a quarterback next spring. They're probably taking a quarterback with one of their 2 first-round picks in the upcoming NFL draft. And one thing we've learned from, if you're a Jets fan, and we've seen this happen a lot over the last decade and a half, it's not great when you draft a quarterback and you don't have a veteran number 1 receiver for him to throw the ball to. Things go a lot better if you have a veteran number 1 receiver to throw the ball to. Having Garrett Wilson around is going to help whatever quarterback the Jets draft next spring. But this game's going to be a challenge because the Cleveland Browns have their own Garrett, a guy by the name of Myles Garrett, who you know. And Myles Garrett and Garrett Wilson are not going to line up one-on-one. Garrett Wilson's not going to block Myles Garrett unless the Jets have lost their minds. Myles Garrett's not going to cover Garrett Wilson unless the Browns have lost their minds. But the player who has the bigger game on Sunday very well might be the player who leads his team to victory. because the Jets' game plan has to be to prevent Myles Garrett from taking over the game, and that means constant chips on Garrett from to help Olu Fashanu. It will mean sometimes leaving a tight end to double team Garrett. That's going to be a really tough matchup for Olu. Fashanu is coming off one of his best games against the Cincinnati Bengals, and he was going up against a guy who's a very talented pass rusher in Trey Hendrickson. But if you were watching that game, you could tell Hendrickson was a shell of himself. That Hendrickson may have just been a decoy to try and get the Jets to kind of slide their protection his way and get other guys one-on-ones, because he really was not helping the Cincinnati Bengals out there much on his own. Garrett is a guy who can destroy a game for you. Garrett, and we've seen this happen over and over through his career. I mean, you go back to 2019. I mean, there was a game the Jets played Monday night, week 2, where Trevor Siemian started. It was right after Sam Darnold was diagnosed with mono, and Garrett annihilated the Jets. And I remember just like I actually could tell you what I said after that game, because you can go back and listen to the podcast I did after that week 2 game in 2019. I pretty much just annihilated Adam Gase for his game plan, for giving Kelvin Beachum no help on Myles Garrett. It was a crazy game plan by Adam Gase. But that's not the only time Garrett's destroyed a team. I mean, Garrett just set an NFL record for sacks in a game. The game the Browns lost pretty handily a few weeks back to the New England Patriots. And it's especially important this week. Now, look, protecting your quarterback is always critical, but we've seen this with the Jets in 2025. Justin Fields has been as up and down as a quarterback can be. 3 pretty good games, 3 horrendous games. In the good games, he's had a lot of time to throw the ball, and he's been kept clean. In the bad games, I don't want to say the offensive line's done a bad job, because Fields has been responsible for a lot of the pressure he's faced in those bad games. So I guess the way I would put it is, when the offensive line has been exceptional, when the offensive line has been above and beyond, when the offensive line has prevented Fields from getting pressure even 4 or 5 seconds, he's been able to deliver. When the offensive line's just been merely good or average or bad, Fields has been borderline unplayable. So going up against the Browns team, and this is a Browns team that has other good pieces on their defensive line. They have a very talented rookie, Mason Graham. They have a couple other guys who are having good seasons. It's a good Browns defense, and they're tough defense to run on. Jets are going to have to run the ball effectively, but against a very talented defensive line, that's not going to be easy. Jets also have to throw, though. One of my go-to phrases this year is the Jets are not running the triple option out of the wishbone. When we say the Jets are going to be a run-heavy team and the Jets need to run the ball, of course they do, but you also need to throw the ball. It's not going to be a Jets team that's going to be able to win throwing the ball 8 times a game. Justin Fields is going to have to be effective. And that means the Jets are going to have a great game plan for Myles Garrett, because Garrett's so good that, even when you double team him, he can beat it. Even when you chip him, he can beat it. Jets are going to need to play their best protecting Justin Fields. And that means Olu Fashanu is going to have to step up. Olu Fashanu, it's been a very up and down season for him. There have been some really, really good games, particularly Miami, Cincinnati. But those are teams that are not particularly well known for their pass rushing ability. And again, I understand Trey Hendrickson's a great pass rusher, but he was not 100%. It was not the real Trey Hendrickson he was facing. This is going to be a huge step up in competition, and there have been a lot of moments this year where Olu has struggled. Jets need him to be playing at a really high level, because the only way Garrett Wilson is going to get involved is if Justin Fields has enough time to throw the ball. And look, one of the things I want to make clear here is that a lot of this criticism is not necessarily on the offensive line. It's on Justin Fields, because if you've watched the games this year, you've seen that Justin Fields has been his own worst enemy. Justin Fields has hesitated, and there are a few things you can do at the quarterback position that are worse than hesitating. I understand the need to avoid mistakes. You don't want to make bad throws into traffic. You don't want to commit turnovers. But the thing is, hesitation, not making a decision, is as big of a mistake sometimes as making a bad decision. So that's something Justin Fields is going to have to focus on. But we know what his flaws are, and we know the Jets are going to have to help him out here. The Jets are going to need to have a big game from their pass protection. And Garrett Wilson, look, we know Garrett Wilson's going to be open. Garrett Wilson's always open. Garrett Wilson knows how to run routes. Garrett Wilson knows how to shake defenders. I think as much as anything, it's on the Jets to utilize Garrett Wilson effectively. There have been games this year where Garrett Wilson hasn't been utilized effectively enough. So it's going to be on Fields. It's going to be on the offensive line to get it to Garrett Wilson. Myles Garrett has a big game. It's probably going to hold down Garrett Wilson, and the Jets are going to have a really tough time winning, particularly with some of their personnel issues on defense. If the Jets can hold Myles Garrett in check, It's going to give Fields the opportunity to find Garrett Wilson, to hit him. And maybe the Jets make some big plays on offense. And maybe they're able to pull off, I don't know if I'd call it an upset. I guess the Browns are technically favored in this game, but a chance to pull off a win, a chance for the team to feel good, a chance for the Jets to start their second half of the season off on a good note after a very turbulent week. And ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll keep talking about what the formula is for a Jets victory. I think this is very much a toss-up game. And there are lots of elements when you're talking about matchups, but also emotionally, where it's not clear where the Jets are going to land. It may not be clear until game time where the Jets land. And I'll explain what all of that means as we continue here on this Friday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by PrizePicks. You and I make decisions every day, but on PrizePicks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement of this sports season. Whether you're following the NFL, NBA, or both, there's no better time to jump in on the action. And if you haven't tried it yet, PrizePicks is the simplest way to play. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats, and if you get them right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and you can play anywhere PrizePicks operates, including California, Texas, and Georgia. You can use PrizePicks both during football Sundays and NBA tip-offs. It keeps every game exciting. You can pick your favorite players like Mahomes or Steph Curry to see how your predictions play out. The new Stacks feature is a game changer. You can now pick more on Steph's points, threes, and assists in the same lineup. Plus, if one of your players leaves early with an injury, the injury reboot saves your lineup from a loss. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. It's good to be right. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Friday. We're getting you ready for Sunday Week 10 action. The Cleveland Browns coming to MetLife Stadium to take on the New York Jets. Jets looking for their second straight win. With everything that's happened, we kind of lost the track of the fact that Jets could end up on their first winning streak of the season. The last time they played was 2 weeks ago against the Cincinnati Bengals. It feels like a really, really long time. First of all, because Jets had a bye last week, so they weren't in action. But second, because of all the action that happened this week at the trade deadline, it's a completely different Jets team that will be taking the field this coming Sunday against Cleveland. And I think that means there are lots of wild cards in this game. We talked about this a bit yesterday in our crossover show with Spencer German of Locked On Browns, but it's going to be interesting to see the Jets' emotional state in this game. Now, I don't want to act like the Jets are going to be devastated as a team after they traded these players, but I don't know how the Jets are going to come out of the locker room in this one. I'm not even sure the Jets know. And I'm not sure how they're going to respond to all of the trades this week, because sometimes it can be the sort of thing that just deflates a team, that demoralizes a team when you see your stars go out the door. And even like when it's the right move for the long run, in the short run, guys in the locker room are still fighting. They still have half a season to go. They still want to play. I think that's like one of the big divides between us as fans and the media, between us and players, because at this point we see the season's over. The team's 1-7, the team's going to have a losing record, the team's not going to the playoffs. So we say, what difference does it make? For the guys in the locker room, it matters a lot. The NFL careers are not long. Every time you take the field, it's important. And the Jets, especially in the first year of a new coach and GM, are trying to build something here. And a winning streak right now, if you're a fan or a member of the media, you may say, well, that's just destroying the Jets draft positioning. If you're in the locker room, particularly for the young guys who are going to be here for a long time, I think the focus is on trying to build something, trying to build momentum heading into year 2 of this regime with Aaron Glenn and Darren Mucci. So the question is, how did that impact the locker room? And, Spencer made a really good point yesterday on Locked On on our crossover show, Spencer German, the host of Locked On Browns. He said, sometimes players can come out and it can be disappointing, but you start fast, you get a quick touchdown, the defense gets a stop. It can kind of be a galvanizing force. There can kind of be like the us against the world component that comes into play, where guys get fired up and they say, we can do this, even though we've lost these great players, even though everyone's doubting us. And I think the way this game starts could end up playing a big role in determining which of the 2 paths the Jets go on in this game. I think that it's either of them is possible. If the Browns go up 10 points early, it might be easy to just kind of give up hope. Whereas if the Jets get off to a hot start, this could be the sort of thing that fires the team up, gets it going. But when you have 2 teams that are this bad, and these are 2 of the worst teams in the NFL in 2025, it gets unpredictable. I mean, we saw this a little bit 2 weeks ago when the Jets went to Cincinnati and played the Bengals, and nobody thought that game was going to be a shootout. I mean, nobody thought the Jets were putting up 39 points, especially after back-to-back games where Justin Fields looked like maybe the worst quarterback in the NFL. I mean, going into that game, we all thought Tyrod Taylor was going to be the starting quarterback for the Jets because Fields pretty much played himself out of the lineup. Fields had, gotten benched at halftime the previous week against the Carolina Panthers, and then Tyrod apparently suffered an injury that prevented him from playing. Fields goes in and out of nowhere leads the Jets to a 39-point outburst, and the Jets win the game. It was just a shocking thing. And sometimes these games get a little unpredictable. So, it could come down to a kind of a fluky play here or there. Who's going to commit the turnover? Can the Jets defense actually start producing turnovers? And I think one of the funny aspects that would come if the Jets defense forced a couple turnovers is people would act like the trades galvanized them. Well, maybe they were first, maybe getting Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams out of there helped them force turnover. Someone's going to come up with some zany theory like that if the Jets produce like 3 turnovers in this game. In reality, what it'll be is you're facing a rookie quarterback in Dylan Gabriel, and rookie quarterbacks tend to put the ball into trouble. Dylan Gabriel doesn't have a high interception rate. I think he only has 2 interceptions on the season so far. But if you look at some of the advanced analytics, he's the guy who's putting the ball into danger and harm's way a lot. He's gotten away with a bunch of throws. Maybe his luck will end this week. Maybe the Jets defense will have a little bit more luck. And then, of course, special teams is always a bit of a wild card. We know all season long, Nick Folk has been really solid for the Jets. He's a guy who came in and stabilized a kicking spot that was very much up in the air through the course of the offseason. We spent much of the offseason wondering who was going to be the starting kicker for the Jets. It seemed like they were going young with Caden Davis and Harrison Mevis. It seemed like they were looking to see which young guy would step up, and then none of them really did. Either of them really did. So the Jets just got out the reliable veteran Nick Folk. Nick Folk, maybe he makes a big role in this game. Maybe the Jets break a big return. In games like this, it could also come down to a bounce of the football. It could come down to a call here or there. I think a game like this is very, very difficult to prognosticate because you have 2 bad teams, so you don't know how they're going to approach these games. The Browns are in pretty bad shape right now. So if you get the Browns down early, that could be a team that you kind of get a sense on the sideline. Here we go again. Nothing can go our way. And the Jets could end up winning this game pretty big. I don't want to predict this game. I think that there, I made the joke a few weeks back when the Jets beat the Bengals and they scored 39 points in the game where nobody was expecting them to do much on offense. That much like John Sterling, the famous Yankees radio announcer who called games for over 3 decades, always said you can't predict baseball. It's true, you can't predict football. The NFL is a league where you see a lot of variation week to week. Every Sunday you see things that just seem completely illogical. But I think there are so many variables in this game. When you talk about how bad these teams are, when you talk about rookie quarterbacks, when you talk about how up and down Justin Fields has been this season, when you talk about the unknown element of how the Jets are going to respond after trading away 2 of their 3 best players, you could see this game going any number of ways. And that's part of I guess that's part of the fun when you have teams that are this bad. It could end up being a very fun game on Sunday, and who knows? Maybe the Jets will get their second win of the season. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out. It helps other Jets fans find the podcast. I hope you enjoy your weekend, everybody. Again, Jets and Browns are playing 1 p.m. Sunday at MetLife Stadium. We'll be back after the game to break down what happened. We'll see if it's a wild one. We'll see if my prediction's right. Talk to you then.